Okay, we will get started. Welcome everyone to this first of a series of learning sessions on what we can call contemporary issues of relevance to the field of social and behavior change. We're delighted on behalf of Rainbarrel to have you all spend time with us in our company for the next hour or so today. Today we are going to focus on nudging, and our key expert and guide for today is Sille Krukow, who is with us and who will be going through her insights and experiences. Sille is from the behavior change group, and she's a nudging and behavioral design expert who has more than 15 years of experience working with behavioral design aimed at helping people make better, safer, and greener decisions and choices. First, Sille will present, and then we will have a 30-minute question and answer session. And when we get to that, just put your name in the chat box and we will call upon you one by one. Sille is from Denmark, and she's worked with many exciting organizations and brands around the world. And she has also been a visiting professor with the University of Colorado, focusing on behavioral design. So here it is. Welcome to Sille, and Sille, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And what a pleasure meeting you all virtually anyway. I hope we get to meet someday in real life. But thank you for that introduction, Thomas. I'm just gonna share my screen here and then get you over to PowerPoint. As Thomas said, I'm a nudge and behavioral design expert, meaning that I originally have a master's degree in visual communication design, but I've spent the past 15 years working with scientists within cognitive psychology and behavioral economics. So what I know a lot about is how we use specific colors, icons, shapes, and so forth to measurably change and impact human decisions. On a daily basis, I run and are part of development projects at Behavior Change Group, which is a consultancy based here in Denmark, but we work with governments all over the world. We work with the EU Commission, different governments in the Middle East, and also a lot of corporate companies. So we do a lot of corporate work, a lot of consumer decision work. So some of the cases I'm going to show you are also related to that. But I feel very fortunate to get to introduce you to our way of working with behavioral design and sort of some of my personal experiences with working with behavioral design today. And as Thomas said, I'm gonna take you through this presentation for the next around 30 minutes, and then we'll have questions. So 30 to 40 minutes of introduction. I'm gonna share some cases with you and insights on behavior change principles, and please don't hesitate to write a comment in the chat. I might need help, Thomas, to read it out loud because I'm only seeing my slides here. If you have any questions as we go, and otherwise, as Thomas said, we also have Q&A at the end. So I'm gonna get into it. Do you see like a bar in the middle of the screen, the Zoom meeting bar, or is it just me seeing that? You see it too?
I think it's just you who see it.
Just me.
Just
okay,
you.
great. Okay,
yeah.
Great, awesome. Okay, well, I'm gonna start then. I'm gonna talk about how to nudge for social behavior change. But I'm just gonna start out sort of talking a little bit about the whole nudging approach and how that was actually introduced. Because as you might know, nudging originates from a political arena. It was first introduced into the Obama administration in 2008 by two guys called Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. So nudging basically means to push and to use our surroundings to provide gentle pushes that can intuitively and subconsciously guide us in a predictable direction. So it's not about putting up bands or manipulating. It's about using all the structure and designs of our world today to guide into a specific direction, but leaving us with an active choice to not do so if we don't want to change our behavior. But I told you that nudging originates from the Obama administration, but actually nudging first originates from the moment we started walking this planet. Because the moment we started altering the design of our surroundings, when we, for example, took a rock and placed it next to the bonfire, we intuitively invited someone else to sit down and get warm. And today we find nudges everywhere in all kinds of societies. So the way we design our roads, our supermarkets, our schools, hospitals, everything, it nudges our behavior in a specific direction. So nudging is always going to be found in a context where you are going to see elephants, because it actually relates to the way the mother elephant uses her trunk to gently guide and push her cub towards water and healthy food. And that's what it's really about. Figuring out, like, how do we make the right decisions, the easy ones? And there are so many good examples on nudges out there already. And the reason why I have this image with me today is because, especially during COVID, there has been so many new emerging nudges coming out in order to help us, for example, lead more hygienic lives to avoid spreading COVID. This is the new Apple Wallet app, which is a very good example on what a nudge typically is. So this, anyway, has become really, really big in Denmark since COVID came, because no shops accept cash anymore because of the spread of COVID. So this has increased very much in Denmark. And the reason why it's very intuitive for us to use a credit card on a cell phone is due to just one piece of design here. The image of the credit card. Because this actually allows us to maintain the normal behavior we used to have before we had a digital version of credit cards, with tapping our credit card onto a paying machine or swiping it through a paying machine. We can still do that now, but now it's a virtual credit card. So because they've designed it in a way that it looks like something we used to know and that we are familiar with, this becomes a very intuitive intervention for us to engage with, which is why the conversion has been so big to these digital means of payment and so forth all over the world. So when it comes to changing behavior, it's really not a matter of changing behavior. It's a matter of understanding what is currently going on right now and how are we navigating in the world right now. And how can we copy that into a new context? So how can we understand what triggers and guides are guiding behavior right now, like this visual element, and then translate it into a new context to make the right decisions, the easy one, in a current situation. But in order to do that, we need to understand what drives human decision making. And basically, human decision making is influenced by two systems in the brain. They're influenced by what we call system 1 and system 2. So system 2 is when we are able to translate information and knowledge into a change of habits. So that's where we are cognitively able to understand, why should I be changing my behavior? Why is it a good idea to do things differently? And then we translate it into a change in habits on a daily basis. So system 2 is actually what makes us the superior species on this planet. And this is what enables us to develop new systems, infrastructure, governance, all these kind of strategic decisions that we make consciously. They're made by what we call system 2. So system 2 is a very powerful tool. It's very specific to human beings, and it's very, very important for our survival. But there is a downside to system 2 thinking, and it is that it is very, very effortful. And that actually means that our blood sugar drops every time we're being system 2 thinkers, which is why we biologically try to avoid to be system 2 thinkers. Because this actually means that we can only pay attention for up to 20 minutes at the time and 45 minutes if we're really fueled on sugar, water, and oxygen. So that's why keeping these kind of interventions within like 30 minutes, that's a very good idea, because otherwise we simply lose attention and we need to refuel on sugar, water, and oxygen. But this also means that we are biologically geared to be system 1 thinkers, being habit driven. So system 1 thinking happens intuitively and most importantly as a reaction to our surroundings. And that's where the importance of the design of our surroundings comes in. Because system 1 habits does not happen consciously. It's simply a reaction based on our instincts and how they react to small cues and guides in our surroundings. This means that when we want to change behavior, there are 2 strategies we can use. The first strategy is to try to influence system 2 enough times so that something that we needed to understand to begin with all of a sudden becomes a natural habit. That's what we do when we, for example, learn how to drive a car. When we learn how to drive a car, we often have to do some kind of theoretical test. We, a lot of the times, have to sit next to someone driving, telling us what to do with our feet, how to drive, when to stop, and so forth. And the first time we do it, it's gonna be really slow and really mentally exhausting. So we can drive like that for like an hour, and then we get out of the car and we're completely done and we need sugar to refuel. That's because we're using system 2 on overdrive. And then over time, as we become more comfortable with driving, it becomes a system 1 habit. Now, because I've been driving for 25 years, I can pass on a green light without even thinking about going through a set of lights, because everything just happens automatically. I react automatically to the lines on the road and so forth, because now it has become a habit. So the first way of changing behavior is training our system 2 until something becomes a system 1 behavior. This approach is very resource effortful, so to speak. So that's going to require a lot of effort, a lot of repetition, and so forth. So there's a way more effective way of changing behavior, and that is actually hacking into system 1 habits. So learning and looking at the current habits that are going on out there and figuring out how do we make small changes in the design of our surroundings that'll have immediate impact on behavior, but does not require effortful system 2 thinking. So we work in that sphere. We work in the sphere of changing the design of our surroundings in order to make fast and effortless changes in habits. And what that means is actually that we work with designing surroundings like this one. Because our brain is geared in this way, we're biologically suited to live in an environment like this. And this is the savannah, where everything is very simple. But more importantly, here we get instant feedback on our actions. So if I was standing here and I started clapping, I would immediately know if that was a good idea or a very bad idea. And I would, of course, know that by looking at the lioness. If she started attacking me, it was a really bad idea to clap. But if she starts running away, it was a really good survival technique. So our brain, because we're 90% system 1 driven or habit driven, is actually geared to live in this very simple environment with immediate feedback. So the challenges that we see in behavior today are caused by complexity, and are basically because our surroundings no longer offer us very simple feedback and immediate feedback. It just offers us overload of information, overload of impressions, and so forth. And that means that the human brain can no longer follow. I feel like asking you just a bit of questions, because these two systems are not things that are just for everybody else. This is actually how my brain works and how your brain works as well. And I don't know if and now you can just answer in the chat, like, if any of you have tried being in an airport that you've never been to before, and you were going to go to the baggage reclaim to find your luggage, name 2 things that you would look for in your surroundings in order to find your way to the baggage reclaim. And Thomas, if you can help me, if there are some answers in the chat. So just 2 things that you would use to navigate from when you're finding your way to the baggage reclaim. I see a couple of answers.
Yeah, I think the signs are big ones.
The signs? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what if you don't understand the signs, or there aren't any signs? What would you look for then in order to find your way?
Other people.
Exactly. These 2 elements that you just described, visual signs and other people, are actually universal behavior change principles. Because 90% of our decisions happen intuitively and based on basic human instincts, we can use those instincts globally to guide behavior, because all people on this planet use visual cues in their surroundings, or signs. That can be also pavement in the floor, the way the walls are designed, icons, and so forth to navigate from. And if we don't get that information, we look at other people. And we do that to save mental energy, to stay within our system 1 habit thinking. So behavior change principles can be applied anywhere in the world and to any kind of target audience. So whether we're working with children in a small town school, or we're working with a lot of passengers in an airport, we can use these principles to guide behavior effectively. But let me show you some examples. Oh no, actually, I just added our methodology as well, just to give you a really quick insight into how we work. So we always start out by learning from existing behavior. That means that the whole first part here of the methodology has to do with behavioral mapping. So we start out by mapping the current behavior. What are their system 1 habits? What does the surroundings look like? How does the surroundings guide us right now? Because our surroundings control 90% of our behavior. Once we know the barriers in the surroundings, or the nudges that are missing, we start designing the nudges, and then we test them eventually to then facilitate change on a bigger scale. So I just wanted to give you that impression of how we work. But let me see here if I can change. Yeah. Okay. I want to show you 4 cases today. So the first case is a corporate case that we've done for a window company called Velux. So Velux is actually based in Denmark, but they export windows to all of the world. And they contacted us because they were working on their sustainability agenda. So they had a big problem with carpenters, because they sell their windows to carpenters, and then carpenters would mount their windows into private households. And the carpenters would often break their products while mounting it. And then they had to return the products, and that was not a very sustainable way of operating. So we started by learning from the existing behavior. We started out by looking at a lot of carpenters mounting windows. And we actually found that there was one big mistake that the carpenters were making here. Because as a natural habit for a carpenter, you have a whole handful of screws when you're mounting a window, and then everything goes really fast. So you use your drill to pick a screw, and then you put them in the holes really, really fast. However, the carpenters had a tendency to choose the wrong screws. They would either choose screws that were too long, but more often too short. And that would mean that the window would not be mounted correctly and would fall out, and then they had to return it. So instead of trying to train the carpenters to do things differently, we just changed one piece of design in their surroundings. We changed the color of the screws so that the carpenters could keep on mounting the way they would always do, but then they could really clearly see the difference between the green screws and the blue screws. And then of course the holes had matching colors. That would help the carpenters intuitively to pick the right screws and thereby not ruin the products, so they didn't have to return and Velux didn't have to throw out that many windows. So that actually increased the number of windows being mounted correctly from 43% to 96%. Just changing that small piece of coloring of the screws. We work a lot with renewable energy as well. And here we've been testing how can we get private households to convert into renewable energy sources. And what we found here is that we can actually use the pack mentality, or what you described as looking at other people in the airport, to drive that change. So we've had around 800 houses on a small island here in Denmark where we've been running tests for the past 3 years. And here we found that by providing information that would tell them how much better they would do for the local community and how much more like everybody else in their local community they would be like if they switched to renewable energy, we had an increase in the people switching by 70%. So using these behavior change principle, putting them into actual design, and these were emails sent out, but just with visualizations on how well people were doing in comparison with other people. These small interventions can have a huge impact on behavior change. Another example I want to show you is an example. We've worked quite a bit with the Danish railway company here on reducing litter and also helping them reduce cost, which goes hand in hand with each other. They asked us to reduce cigarette litter as one particular problem, because that's really bad for the environment and it's a big issue here in Denmark. So we started out again by learning from the existing behavior. And to begin with, the railway company had a lot of ban signs. So they would have all these signs sitting around the station saying, don't smoke here, don't litter here, and so forth. But smokers needed to have a smoke before going to the next train. So they would simply just look for other people, because they looked for signs on where they're supposed to smoke, but there were no signs telling them where to smoke, just where not to smoke. So they would just go and stand next to other smokers, and then they would smoke in the wrong areas anyway and leave their litter there. So we took away all the ban signs, and then we added what we call visual guides. So these yellow squares and matching yellow bins. Just simply showing the smokers where are you allowed to go to smoke and where should you leave your litter. And that reduced litter by 30% and has since been scaled to all national stations here in Denmark and the airport as well. The last one I want to show you is a cost reduction, but also a life-saving intervention that we did with Capital Region here in Denmark as well. This had to do with patients that were waiting to get surgery. So a big challenge with a specific group of patients when they're waiting to get surgery is that they need to fast. So they can't eat for 24 hours before they need surgery. Unfortunately, the nurses didn't know which patients were supposed to eat and not. There was nothing in the surroundings showing them which patient should be eating now. And the patient just forgot because they got hungry and then they wanted something to eat. And that means that a lot of surgeries were being postponed, which is very risky for the patients, but also very costful for the hospitals. So in order to change that, we simply added just a small cue in the surroundings. So we added a wearable feedback on the patient, showing them I am not allowed to eat now. That was visible for both the patient and also the nurses, and then adding it onto whiteboards as well in the patient rooms. So these two small visual cues helped nurses become aware of that I can't serve food for this patient, and also helped the patient remember I'm not allowed to eat. And that reduced the number of surgeries being postponed by 50%. So when we move into surroundings, we learn and look at the existing behavior in order to figure out, and also the surroundings, how can we change small thing in the surrounding to improve decision-making immediately? And we work with what we call behavior change principles. So as I mentioned, these are principles that work with basic human instincts and on a global scale. And the great thing about that is that you can take something from one arena, for example, from our smoking experiment in Denmark, and use it on a completely different challenge somewhere else in the world. If you want to guide traffic in a specific way, the solutions are already out there. You simply just need to be able to map them and transfer them into other contexts. So we use behavior change principles like, for example, right information at the right time. This is an intervention done together with 7-Eleven and the railway company here in Denmark as well. Here, they wanted travelers to get it. They do traveler surveys every year, and the surveys actually said that travelers were, oh, there's an echo. That travelers were really unhappy that they never got coffee and croissants in the train. And the railway company couldn't serve that, but 7-Eleven could. So we looked at the existing behavior, and what we saw was that travelers would go straight to the stations, and they would take their luggage like this guy and go straight to the track where the train was going to depart. By the time they got to the track, they realized, okay, my train doesn't depart until in 10 minutes. So I could have gotten a coffee and a croissant before I left. But now they wouldn't go all the way up the stairs to find the shop and do that because they were afraid of missing their train. So to change that habit, we simply changed the position of the waiting screens, meaning that the waiting screens would be placed up before you get to the train track, just next to 7-Eleven, showing travelers how long do I have to wait? And then at that point, realizing, okay, well, I actually have time to get whatever I need for my train journey. And that increased sales for 7-Eleven and improved satisfaction with the trains enormously. So this is just a small change in the flow of information, serving the right information at the right time, because we're not cognitively able to keep the information for a long time and then pull it out in the right moment. That requires too much system to thinking. Feedback mechanisms are very crucial. We use that to navigate everywhere we go. This is, of course, a feedback mechanism from a car key. Of course, a car is not born with making a sound or blinking with the lights every time we lock it. That's a feedback mechanism that's designed into the car. And these kind of feedback mechanisms can be used to guide behavior and make us feel at ease almost everywhere in every kind of context. And I just want to show you this other example of a feedback mechanism, which is indoor air monitor. So this is an indoor air monitor called Canary. So it relates to In the old days when miners would bring canary birds into the mines, because then if the canary birds died, they would know that the air quality was dangerously poor and they needed to get out of there. So this is a new tech product that doesn't look very techish, but it gives us visual feedback on indoor climate. Let me just show you what it does if we need to open a window and get fresh air. It does this. Oops. So the canary dies if the indoor climate is too bad. And that's also visual feedback, telling us now we have to open the window without getting a lot of written information or getting weird numbers on CO2 levels or whatever we have in indoor environments. So visual feedback is a very powerful behavior change principle that we can use everywhere in the world. Framing of communication is also a behavior change principle. This is a case study done on patients. It's actually a study done on cancer patients, looking at how do we influence their choice of treatment. So one group of patients were offered, they were both offered the same kind of treatment, but one group of patients were told that if you take this kind of treatment, you have 80% chance of survival. The second group were told, if you take this kind of treatment, you have 20% risk of dying. And obviously the ones that had 80% chance of survival chose the treatment. So the way we frame communication and whether it resonates with the target audience we're talking to determines completely whether we see a change in habits. Visual guides, as I've mentioned a couple of times, 80% of human beings on this planet are visually driven. So that means if we want to change habits, communicate visually and in the moment of choice. This is an example from Melbourne, Australia, and maybe you know it, Thomas. This is actually made by the Ministry of Traffic in Australia, where they wanted to tackle one of the newest, biggest killer in our road system today, which is pedestrians passing on a red light and being hit by cars. And the reason why they do that is because there is a new System 1 habit in our society today, which is looking at our cell phone while we're walking on the street. And in Melbourne, they tested out different solutions to reduce the number of pedestrians being killed due to this cause. And what actually works better was giving visual guides in the ground. The reason for that is that if you place the pedestrian light in the ground, you place it in the line of sight of people looking at their cell phone. And that reduced the number of people being killed in pedestrian lights by 45%. So always give visual guides to the extent that is possible at all. That's the most effective way of communicating. Matter out of place has to do with the way we structure elements in our surroundings. Intuitively and with our System 1 thinking, we are geared to match things together. We match colors to colors or shapes to shapes, and we always match our things into context. We might have different systems, which is why somebody can think that I'm really messy, but they are not, simply because we have different intuitive systems. But we always try to make things come into balance or match each other. So, but whether something is in place, meaning matching something else, or out of place, and it doesn't match something else, that influences our perception. So if you, for example, look at these two restaurants here, and then write in the chat, which one do you perceive to be more exclusive, the top one or the bottom one? So write your answers in the chat, top one or the bottom one to be more exclusive. I can't read it, Thomas. I need your help again.
Yes, Sille, I think there are most for the bottom, but some are for the top.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So most for the bottom. Let me tell
And
you.
there's,
Yeah.
And there's
So,
a neither as well.
okay.
None of them look exclusive.
That's fair enough. Most exclusive out of the two. So the bottom one, the reason why the bottom one to us just intuitively and just by a glance seems more exclusive to us is actually caused by one thing in the design of the top one. So if you see on the facade here, you see a lot of pictures of food. And food in this context on the street is a matter out of place, because intuitively we know that food doesn't belong on the street. So it's very close to the street, to the pavement and the ground where you have animals and people walking. And that makes us intuitively perceive that as being less exclusive, because it's a matter out of place element. And we can play with that. We can make elements seem in place or out of place, depend on how we want to influence perception of products or things in general. So matter out of place is a principle we can use as well. And then, of course, social proof, using other people's behavior to guide behavior. This is a similar experiment to ours, but just done in the US, where a utility company called O-Power actually added a small icon onto their electrical bill to reduce electricity usage. So they would show consumers how well or bad are you performing compared to other neighbors, to the energy efficient neighbors and all neighbors. And if the person in the middle here were performing better than the energy efficient neighbors, they would start using more energy, because then they would start thinking, okay, well, why do I need to be very conscious about my energy use when everybody else is using more than me? So they actually also had to add a smiley onto this graph to show them, are you doing well or bad? And these small intervention actually reduced energy consumption by 2%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's in the whole of US. So it's quite a lot of electricity being saved.
Sille?
Yes.
Let me just add one comment to the example you had before around the exclusivity of the two different restaurants. So there's a lot of comments in the chatter going on about whether that is contextual, cultural, different, etc. So I just wondered, do you want to, express any experience with this being culturally different in different settings?
Yes, so it definitely is culturally different. I completely agree, and I'm sorry I wasn't completely aware of that. So because system one behavior varies from every culture, and even it can be a culture within an organization as well. Different departments behave in different ways, or in a village or wherever. So we have very different system one habits. So of course, this is going to work for a setting that is similar to Copenhagen, which is where this is from. But this might not be a matter out of place in other areas of the world. So if it's a natural thing to, for example, have a lot of street food, then this wouldn't be a matter out of place. So it depends on the context and the actual situation. The important message here is that if we become aware of the system or the design of the surroundings in that context, and then we understand what is an in-place element here and what is an out-of-place element here, and how can we use that actively to influence perception. So of course, it differs depending on what culture you're in, because it's going to be different, but also what situations, what settings you're in, on what is going to be in place and what's going to be out of place. So so that's a good point to add to this one.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that.
No problem. So I'm almost at the end, but I just want to demonstrate to you the importance of small elements in the design of our surroundings. So this is a set of Legos that I have taken apart, but if you put it together, it becomes a piece of toy. But right now I've taken it apart, and then a bit of my designer OCD made me divide it into different colors. But if you can just not think too much about that. But the thing is, here I've taken away some very important triggers. And these are hopefully maybe the triggers that will help you figure out what toy is this going to become when you put it together. So let me just ask you, by looking at this set of Legos, how would you interact with this? What kind of toy would you try to make out of this set of Legos? Write it in the chat. I see some chats coming in.
Yeah.
What do we have?
Lots of creativity here.
Yeah.
And we even have a gun. I think that's amazing difference. Boat and planes, rockets, a fish, a ship,
yeah.
gun,
yeah.
A temple.
What was that? A temple?
A temple.
Yeah. So notice how you use the colors, the shape of the pieces to create a mental image. All the different toys that you're describing here, they're based on just small input from this image. So the shape of the red ones, the red color in itself, maybe you're looking at the blue color, some of the small black things. I haven't heard the right guess yet.
You have not heard the right one yet. Okay.
No. Any more guesses?
The USA.
The USA?
Yeah.
It's not the USA either. Okay, well, let me give you the missing triggers, and hopefully that's going to make a difference and help you create a mental image of the right piece of toy. Here you go. Any guesses?
Plane and helicopter comes up.
Yes, it's a helicopter.
It's a helicopter.
This is what it is. So you see how adding these small elements into the design of our surroundings help us create the right mental image. And that means that you're also going to engage with these pieces in the right way, creating a helicopter. So if you are to guide behavior effectively, always start out by giving people the right mental image. If I had started out by giving you the image of a helicopter and then giving you these elements, I could have left out the missing pieces, but you would still have a mental image of a helicopter and try to assemble it in the right way. So figuring out, okay, what's missing in the design of our surroundings. And again, whether it's your own living room or whether it's a big office or whether you're in a village or a hospital or whatever you're looking at how does the surroundings guide our subconscious habits and what small triggers are missing for them to interact with it as if it was a helicopter or whatever actions you agree on facilitating. That's the whole point of nudging and behavioral design. To make the right decisions easy and figure out how do we facilitate that without wasting mental energy and letting people to have more surplus for the things that are actually important for them, such as having conversations with other people, doing their work or whatever. Because a lot of the times the interventions that we are asked to design are the interventions that are right now stealing time away from people, stealing their mental energy so they don't lead sustainable lives, healthy lives, and so forth. So if we have time, I just wanted to show you like a really quick video if we have sound as well. Do we have time for that, Thomas?
Yeah, we do. Go ahead.
Okay. So I started out by saying that nudging and behavioral design is actually as old as the human species. And ever since we started altering the design of our surroundings, we started nudging each other and guiding each other in specific ways. And I just want to show you this experiment, which was done in the 30s or 50s, I'm not actually sure, but it's called the elevator experiment. And what we're going to see here is a guy, and we're going to see the effect of pack mentality, basically. But we're going to see one person walking into an elevator, and everybody else in the elevator has been instructed. So they are a pack, they know what to do, but the one person doesn't know what's going on. And we're going to see how he reacts to that. But I just want to make sure I have sound.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with a white shirt, the lady with a trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. Now, here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First, he makes a full turn to the rear, and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
So just like you mentioned in the airport, the behavior of others is one of the really big influences of our own habits. And it's just important to remember, because that means that we are all role models. And it also means that the way we design our surroundings in order to facilitate social behavior is very crucial when it comes to a habit change and whether we're nudge or not. Oops, let me just see if I can, yeah. And that's actually all I have for now. So maybe I should leave it on the helicopter and then over. Should I stop sharing the screen, Thomas?
Yeah, I think you can do that, Sille. Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. And I think I'd just like to say, normally the devil is in the detail. And now I feel we have a little bit, the solution is in the detail as well. Really appreciate it. This was really good. Thank you, Sille. I think a big hand from, I can see across the board here, and we'll delve right into the Q&A session. See plenty of hands clapping. So thank you for this, Sille. I think in terms of the questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put your question in the chat box. We definitely like to hear your voice as well. I imagine there's quite a few questions. So I did see a question coming from Robert Cohen from Rainbarrow earlier, and that was about the issue of trust. Robert, do you want to just briefly put your question to Sille?
Okay. Every month I receive my electric bill, with a comparison to my energy usage compared to my neighbors. And I think that's a very good thing. And it has made me more conscious of my energy consumption. At the same time, I feel a large degree of mistrust toward the energy company, Con Edison in this case. I just wonder if you are able to address issues of trust in your work, because context is so important in societies where trust has collapsed. Even the nudging, I'm sure, is affected. Truth, lies, etc., the information and the visuals as well. Anyway, just a question.
Sure.
And thank you, Sille. Excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and a great question. I mean, the way we see it and the way we work with trust is that trust is always sort of an outcome of us being too much in our system two thinking, if we're not trusting something. So the way trust is built from our perspective and how we work with it anyway, is that if we're able to, through our surroundings, understand completely what is being expected of us, who is communicating to us, and it's transparent to us what is going on, then we can stay in our system one and everything feels comfortable and trustworthy. But every time we sense that something is not right, they're doing this to greenwash something, or, you know, there is some kind of intention behind this that they're not telling us, we jump into our system too. And then we start analyzing and we start investigating and trying to figure out what's actually going on here. So if you have a lack of trust, it's normally caused by two things. It's caused by a matter out of place. We have a sense that could be, for example, we have a sense of a corporate company trying to talk to us like a person that seems very out of place because it's not trustworthy. And that makes us believe it less. Or if we have, it can also be the other way around, like a private friend trying to talk to us in a very corporate way, for example. Then that person becomes, we don't trust that person because it doesn't match the setting and the tone, the voice of tone, and the way they would normally communicate. So it becomes a matter out of place. So to us, trust is always built if we can make things transparent and if we can leave people to be in their system one thinking, meaning that everything aligns up with what their expectations are. And so that's one part of it. The other part is that it's very important for us to nudge on things that we know that the target audience are intending to do. So if we, for example, work with a target group, of course, that's difficult when we work with big groups of citizens, but we need to have a common ground and some kind of indication that the citizens actually have a wish to eat more vegetables, for example, or become healthier in a certain area. Because if we start nudging them in one direction where they have no intention to go, then we're going to lose a lot of trust there. So I don't know if that made sense or was a bit of, okay, great.
I think we need a whole series of books on how to build trust in this trustless world. So I think you did a good job at answering it, Sille. Thank you. I saw quite a few comments, etc. Would anyone like to raise a hand and a specific question, or do you? Yes, I see Yvonne. Go ahead. Unfortunately, I don't see everyone on the same.
I have
Yes.
my hand.
First of all, thank you, Ring Barrel, for this opportunity. We have such great minds in this community that we have to create a community of strength in our own community also. I think it's a very, very strengthful tool. Excuse me, my English is not so good. I'm from Mexico. Thank you very much,
good.
Silke. thank you very much. It was just incredible, your presentation. And I was like, I was mapping the type of interventions, and I wanted to ask you something. With all these incredible interventions, and I want to make you the following questions. I can see two types of interventions, but I want you to assure me if that's okay. One type of intervention is a positive intervention in which you focus on the positive side and not the negative side. That, for example, that is the case of the survival pills, the energy consumption, or I can divide these positive interventions in two. One is values and yes, values like health, care, etc., or desires as coffee and cigarettes and all of this, no? The luminous part and the not so luminous part, but okay, the desires. And the other kind of interventions are more practical. I mean, there are two levels of interventions. Yeah, the second one is like more practical things that can make a real difference. For example, the Velux company and credit cards. I mean, that goes more for practical needs, no? That goes directly to our pockets and to the efficiency of a factory, no? And I understand that is a very, very important issue. But I can see there are different things. One thing is the value of care and the value of health and or the desires, and the other one are the practical ones. I don't know if you agree with this distinction.
Well, actually, I see them going hand in hand, because to me, nudge and behavioral interventions are always practically based. So just to give you an example, we have been working with health in the Middle East, and especially with the school children. But health and having the value of wanting to have a better health has to do with everyday actions. So it has to do in that case with children either choosing, or actually it's parents choosing to put a chocolate bar in their lunchbox or an apple. That's a very small daily choice, a practical choice. But if it's carried out 7 days a week with a chocolate bar, it results in very poor health for your children. So the way we're traditionally taught to operate with values and whether we create something positive that is perceived great is that we have to start with motivation, and we have to start by introducing people to wanting to have better health or wanting to desire something or so on and so forth. And then the behavior is going to follow. But within the arena that we're in, we do it the opposite way. Because we find that if we change those practical everyday choices, if we make it easy for parents to put an apple into the lunch box instead of a chocolate bar, we are actually gonna, if we make that easy for them, they're gonna get more and more motivated to lead more healthier lives, and therefore see an increase in the value they think that a healthy lifestyle brings to them. Because all of a sudden it's made easy for them. So we start with behavior and practical implementations and interventions first. And I don't know if it's the same kind of values that you mean, but yeah, to me they're very much connected, because you become more motivated the easier things get. So the easier you can make everyday practical choices, then all of a sudden altogether you're complete fan of leading sustainable lives or healthy lives and so forth, because we've taken away all the barriers of everyday life. And a lot of the times it's really boring, because when we do a lot of studies and field visits, it really comes down to small physical barriers, whether people succeed or not.
Yeah.
If they have to look too long for a pen, they're not going to write a letter. If they're going to, like these small, really boring and unsexy barriers are the ones that we need to overcome. So a lot of the times when we provide the solution, people say, well, that's just common sense. It's like, yeah, well, it wasn't there before. So, yeah, so to me, that is that's going to influence our perception and of values and how we perceive that in the long term. I don't know if that was an answer, if that made sense to what you meant.
I agree with your point, but I see that there are some, yes, you have to do it from the practical way, but it's another approach.
It is.
Have some values that are beneath some practical approaches. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree totally with your point of view. Yeah.
Great.
And thank you for a great question.
Just in the interest of time, because we have quite a few more questions lined up. So I'm just suggesting let's go to Peggy, then Supriya, then Bea, and then Madeline.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Really, it's coming very timely. I don't know if I can throw you this question. You feel free to be able to answer or not. We are all facing now in our work this general complacency of the public towards the preventive measure for COVID. And we have used everything we could. So we're running out of any innovative approaches to be able to tell the people that COVID is not over, when everyone, one way or another, if they took the vaccine or they got COVID, think that by now they're protected. So there is no more need to be by any means conscious of their health and the health of others. Where do you see nudging in this? I know you need, maybe it needs a session on its own to discuss it, but do you feel that nudging at this stage, after having tried so many approaches over 2 years, could still be an option in addressing this complacency that we're seeing in the community? Or not needs a special environment or special circumstances? Over.
No, I definitely see, and of course I have to say that because that's all I love and do and work with every day. But there are always, I mean, nudges can be effective no matter where you are in that process. But the important thing is, I think, is to become aware of what are the target behaviors that you're aiming for. Because if you're aiming, so it's very hard. We had the same challenge here in Denmark, that it's very hard if you want to make like a very broad communication push to the citizens and you want them to still take care and stuff like that, because then it becomes very fluffy. And that means that we actually have to use a lot of system 2 thinking in order to translate that into specific habits. Well, what do they mean when they say take care of each other? Does that mean that I can't hug? I need to be 2 meters away from someone, 1 meter, I need to wear a mask? What does that mean on a practical level? So by starting out, by setting up very specific target behaviors, we want people to still maintain 2 meters distance when they're standing in line in the shopping mall. That could be one target behavior. Then you can create a specific nudge to that, because then you look at the surroundings and say, well, why is it very difficult right now? Well, maybe it's difficult right now because they took away those red markers on the floor showing people what 2 meters are, meaning that they have to use their system 2 to kind of figure out, is that 2 meters? And then they see everybody else crowding up, and then it's like, well, okay, whatever. So a lot of the times when we fall back into bad habits, it's simply a matter of the choice architecture having changed again. So we need to look at, okay, well, where are we currently now? What are the target behaviors that we are aiming for? How is the surroundings guiding that intuitively? And maybe we took away some of the great interventions that worked really well during COVID when it was at its highest. Maybe we need to reintroduce them again, but maybe in a different format now, because people are a bit tired of COVID. So maybe we should frame it differently than having to do with COVID. So yeah, definitely, I would always use that approach because it's more cost effective in all means. And thank you for the great feedback, by the way.
Great point. It reminds me of the need in communication also to refresh messaging and materials, and this goes the same way. And not only refresh, but sometimes things are not reproduced, and therefore things are no longer visible. Excellent. I'm gonna go to Supriya. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for, let me add my thanks for an excellent presentation, really thought-provoking. My question was basically, you know, you made, at one level, you made it sound so simple. This was the issue and this is, you know, what you did, but I'm sure it was not. So how do you get to that solution? What's the process by which you understand what people do? And therefore arrive at a solution. And my other point, if at all you do have, is since many of us work in the development field, even whatever I saw, you know, when I looked for material on nudge, was mostly in the corporate sector. I really could not easily find examples from the development sector of how this has been used. And I wondered whether you had any.
Let me start with the last one. Unfortunately, I don't have that many great examples, and it's really unfortunate because it would be so effective. And yeah, I don't know why it is like that. Maybe the great cases are not being shared enough. But yeah, it's a very good. I wish there were more examples on that out there, but we don't know them either.
Okay, thank you.
And I think maybe it's because a lot of corporate organizations and large-scale governments are really scaling up on nudging and behavioral design right now. So a lot of the practical appliance cases are from those sectors. And just to answer your question, well, I know it sounds really easy, but as you said, it takes. So normally it takes between 6 to 12 weeks for us to develop between 10 to 12 nudges for a specific context. And just to give you an example, right now we're working with a supermarket chain here in Denmark on ensuring sustainable consumption. So we're basically redesigning the whole supermarket, the way they brand their products and everything to get consumers to choose the climate-friendly products. So the ones that has less transportation, less water usage, and so forth. And what we start out doing is mapping out together with the management, what are the target behaviors you're aiming for? Is it to reduce the amount of red meat being purchased and increase the number of cucumbers being purchased? So we're down to that specifics. So we set up specific target behaviors that are measurable because we need to measure the impact of our interventions. A lot of the times our interventions are invisible, which means that we have to be able to measure the behavioral impact. But then we go on I would say 1 to 3 day screening session, which is a field visit. Here we take our cell phones and take pictures of everything in the surroundings. So we go through the natural user journeys, whether it's a supermarket, a school, the way littlemen work, we go on drilling platforms and stuff like that. And then we go through the normal day routines of employees or school children or whatever we have. But we take pictures of everything. The floor, we take notice of how the light guides us, what we see visually, what we smell, because that influences our system 1 habits. So we collect all of those images and then we start analyzing them. We map out the user journeys and say, okay, well, so step 1 is here, then you see this, then you see this, then you see that. And then we look at the images that corresponds with that user journey and we map out what are the barriers. What did we notice was missing if I am to choose more climate-friendly products? Well, just to give an example within what we're working with right now, is that, for example, when you get to the meat section, the red meat is placed in the front. That's a huge barrier. Because we're lazy people, we're biologically set to be lazy, so we always grab what's right in front of us. And Also, we know that shoppers, they shop for the meat. So they go for the meat first, and then they decide what vegetables to pair that with. But the second barrier is then when you're at the meat and you have chosen your meat, there are no vegetables available. You have to make your way back to the vegetable area to find those. And most people are, again, we are lazy creatures. We don't do that. So we just cut down on the vegetables. And that leads us to have not climate-friendly lifestyles. So you see how now we know what the barriers are, and then it's simply just a matter of restructuring the interior design of the supermarket, adding vegetables onto the meat counter, right. And of course, placing the red meat the furthest away so that fish and chicken are in the front. But we only notice that because we take all the pictures, we go those user journeys, and we pay attention to how the surroundings guide us. And then we also do supportive interviews. And we actually also do data collection. So we collect data on the share, in this case, for example, right. The share of red meat being sold compared to the share of fish and chicken and vegetables. So that we know that the observations that we've seen, because we only see a moment in time, that we can back that up by data, and that it's an actual representation of what's going on. And then we start selecting our behavior change principles, because then we know, for example, now we have to change the default setting of the meat counter to contain more green stuff rather than just having meat. And now we know that we have to show, for example, recipes of vegetarian dishes to inspire, because we know that 50% of consumers are there to be inspired. And there is no inspiration in the surroundings right now. So that whole field trip and the analysis of the pictures helps us do that. And you can do that on a very small scale or on a large scale. I mean, if we had more time, I would ask you to do what we call spot a nudge exercise, where you actually take your cell phone and you just turn around in the room you're in, and you take pictures of small elements that either guide you in a specific direction, good nudges, or that keep you from making a specific choice that makes it hard for you to get more water. So my challenge here where I'm sitting would be, I'm going to be dehydrated after a while because I don't have water near me. That's a physical barrier that's keeping me from being hydrated and healthy. So these barriers are everywhere we go. And just to take the Middle East and the school children, a huge barrier was that in the school cantina, they had soda pops, but no water being sold. So access to water was very, very low. So their sugar intake was super, super high. So these are all the barriers that when we hear about them, it just seems like, oh yeah, of course they didn't succeed with being healthy. Of course we didn't succeed with staying hydrated or leading climate-friendly lives. But very rarely people actually take the time to go through the user journey, take those pictures, look at them and start analyzing. Well, actually, I do understand why everybody's eating red meat, because it's always placed at the first meat counter and everything else is then follows. So yeah, so it takes between 6 to 12 weeks to develop 10 to 12 nudges, in our case anyway. And then of course we do longer studies, but that would be in a specific context, in a specific area. And then we can scale those solutions onto other contexts, because of course the supermarket we're working in right now, the ambition is that we create those nudges and then they can scale it nationally and internationally as well.
This is super helpful, Sille. I think, unfortunately, we are running short of time. So we have 2 more questions. I just want to make the point that maybe the fact that we don't have many good case stories about nudging in the social impact space is exactly the reason why this is becoming more and more important in our field, that we consider how nudging can also contribute to social and behavior change. And maybe that will be a book we're going to write together 10 years from now. Bear, the question is yours, and then it's Madeline, and then I'm afraid we have to wrap up from there. Go ahead, Bear.
Thank you so much, Tomas. Thank you, everyone, and Sille especially for the presentation. And it's lovely to see so many familiar faces and new faces that are part of the Rain Barrel family. I have a question, Sille, about the landscape and the environment, because it really struck me, the picture of the lioness in the savannah and the simplicity of the landscape in terms of how crowded or not crowded it is, and the kind of world that we live in today. You know, we're all in boxes here, we especially since the pandemic. So I'm wondering, has nudging and behavioral science, is it adapting to this more online virtual reality? And how is it applied to a world that is unfortunately less sensorial? If you think, I don't even know if that's a word, but online there's less sensors to change. And I'm curious about your thoughts.
Oh, that's a good question and a big one. Well, so basically the mission of nudging is and will always be the same: to design the Savannah environment for us, whether we're online or offline. So it doesn't really matter what surrounding we're in. The brain is not going to evolve fast enough for us to adjust to that. So that is why we're feeling completely overwhelmed, and we're getting bombarded by things both online and 24/7. So definitely, because technology is developing so much faster than the human brain, there is such a big need for behavioral design to be integrated into digital solutions. Fortunately, you can adjust these kind of services really fast, which is why a lot of the great apps, just to take an example, and the ones that survive are the ones that actually are able to create simplicity and to make something easier for us. So all the apps that just create noise, they often leave again. So one of the only reasons, for example, that Facebook is still very popular is because it still makes it easy for us to remember whose birthday it is. So in that digital world, I think the noise creating elements are going to die very fast, because we're always striving to get back to the Savannah. But there is definitely an increasing need for nudging and behavioral design, especially in the digital world, because I mean, one of the biggest influences of behavior are other people. And that is exactly what's missing a lot of the times in the digital sphere, which is also why we see that really hardcore bullying of people and so forth, because we don't have a sense of another person being in front of us. And that is such an interesting space to be as when it comes to nudging. There are so many studies done on how we operate against a social norm when we think we're by our own. Just to give you an example, in public toilets, if we have the sinks placed in sort of the common room in front of the toilets, we see an increase of, rather than having the sinks in each toilet booth, we see an increase in the number of people actually washing their hands with 45%, simply because the fear of somebody else seeing them not washing their hands is so great. So that's just an example on how social behavior influences us. And there's definitely, when we see all that bullying online, it's an expression from a behavioral point of view anyway, that we are missing human presence. So we're simply, it's not personal for us, and we don't see that person in front of us crying when we say something bad about them. And that is going to be one of the bigger problems when it comes to digitalization. We've been working actually a lot with patients in hospitals, and especially elderly patients, to get them to use self-service, like registration stands, because they wouldn't use them. They were too afraid of the digital machine and the screen, and what were they supposed to do. So one of the interventions that actually increased the number of elderly patients using them was if we added like an image of a full-size nurse just behind the registration stand. because that would then cheat the brain to think, oh, the nurse is standing right there. I'm okay. I can always ask her if something goes wrong. And then they would use the self-service stand to a way higher extent. And I think to me, that's going to be important when it comes to this digital world, whether we're able to integrate the human part of it into it, because that's going to determine whether we go nuts or it actually becomes a great service and we don't kill each other. well, yeah, I don't know if that made sense, but yeah, the human, we're so social, so we can't leave out the human part at all.
I think it does make a lot of sense, Sille, but it's also a long and big topic, as you said, many things to add to that. I suggest we go to the last question from Madeline, and then after that, unfortunately, we will wrap up. But Madeline, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, you gave thank you very much, obviously, for your presentation was excellent, and many people have commented on it. I mean, it's really been an expansive discussion, so thank you very much to everybody. I was wondering, I mean, some of the applications I can see very clearly how it would translate into the world that we work in, but I'm wondering in terms of applications for areas that are very deviant in the sense of, you know, violence, domestic violence, violence against children. But I mean, how do you see nudging as being applicable? Are there any examples of this? Does it require, you know, additional support mechanisms? I mean, have you thought about those areas, or do you know anybody who's thinking about those areas?
Well, I don't actually. And so I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't dare to just say, yeah, that would work, because I don't know, like it would definitely have to be investigated. I think what's important is to look at, you know, there's always going to be consistencies in behavior leading up to violence. That's my assumption anyway. So I think the way to approach it would be to look at, you know, can we find consistencies in the behavioral patterns either leading up to that kind of violence? What triggers it? At what time of the month? Does it have to do with the lack of money, intake of alcohol, all these different factors? So the user journey, so to speak, leading up to domestic violence. What are the surroundings? What is the current setting? I think in that case, the setting would probably also be that there is a lack of other people being present, other than maybe the family and the children. But there would definitely be some behavioral barriers that might be addressed. The tricky part when working in the private household is always that it's hard to integrate into the private household if people are not motivated to welcome you in. So I don't know of any cases, but it's still behavioral patterns. And if you can map out those patterns and map out those triggers where it starts escalating, I would bet that you could create behavioral interventions as well that would guide it into another behavior. I would hope, but yeah, I don't have experience in that field.
I was sort of wondering what, in my mind, what changes for example, in New York, they're thinking about with people pushing other people off the subway platform, you know, how they go through this process of why people are doing that, you know, is this just copycat behavior? They want attention. You know, I was thinking about, as you were presenting, how you look at sort of the other side of very negative behavior. So that's why I was also very curious about it, because it could be in a private space, but it could be in a very public space as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things for our work is that we cannot force anybody who doesn't want to change to change. So if you really want to be an asshole, so to speak, and push somebody off the tracks to the subway, then our interventions won't guide you to do anything else. If you're determined to do a bad thing, you can do it regardless of our interventions. But there are things in this, I mean, we have been working a lot with vandalism and things like that, where you should think that people are not motivated to change. But then adding, just to give you an example, and it's a really simple example. So since we've been working a lot with the railway company, they see a lot of vandalism as well on their trains. And also actually people running across the tracks and getting hit by trains and things like that. But we've been working specifically with their elevators and their sort of, what do you call them, track areas. And here there is a lot of vandalism. And so what we did was that we started out mapping the surroundings, and we could see that one of the challenges was that the people vandalizing these areas had a sense of them being alone. So it would be like dark, they could do it without being noticed and so forth. So with that said, we create an impression of human presence in these areas. And from a practical level, that actually meant that we put up large size stickers of men walking a trolley with a baby in there. And these interventions had a huge impact on vandalism. And we also shedded light on that illustrative person. That had such a big impact on vandalism because it completely moved it from that area. Because even though it's just an image of a person, the brain actually takes it as if somebody's watching you. And a lot of people have a social norm around small children that they wouldn't harm them and they wouldn't start spray painting on them or doing drugs in front of them and things like that. So that had a huge impact. Of course, it just moved the problem because then we had to tackle it somewhere else. So you have to think the whole thing through and make sure that you then lift it somewhere else, because you're not going to get a drug addict to stop doing drugs just because a sticker of a man and a baby. So yeah, but unfortunately, no, but it's, yeah, it would be such a great and meaningful area to apply this into.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sille. I see people are, you know, very engaged. I love it. We have also to be mindful of people's time. So we've come to the end of this session. I want to say thank you so much, Sille. I feel that this has been an incredibly insightful learning session. I feel that this has given all of us some very tangible ideas about some of the things we can add to our work. And I know that this is not the end of it. There's going to be more talk, more discussions, more learnings about this field, but I am very happy that we have you in our network, and it's been a pleasure to learn from you today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for all of you for watching and asking great questions. It was really interesting.
Super interesting, super great questions. We will leave a recording of this and share with you and others who are interested, and there will be more sessions to come. But for now, there will be just the question of nudging you out of here. So I will start doing that, bidding you a good day, a good night. And again, thank you so much to all, and thank you so much, Sille. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.